Part 2. Comparative mortality of the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. In his speech in the House of Commons, June 19, 1883, Sir Lyon Playfair made the following statement. An analysis of 10,000 cases in the metropolitan hospitals shows that 45% of the unvaccinated patients die, and only 15% of vaccinated patients. And he further showed that statistics of a similar character had been published in other countries. It will no doubt be objected by my readers that these statistics, if correct, are a complete proof of the value of vaccination, and I shall be expected to show that they are incorrect, or give up the whole case. This I am prepared to do, and I now undertake to prove, firstly, that the figures here given are unreliable, and secondly, that such statistics necessarily give false results unless they are classified according to the age periods of the patients. The percentages of vaccinated and unvaccinated unreliable. The simple fact of death from smallpox is easily ascertained, and has been for many years accurately recorded. But whether the deceased person had been vaccinated or not is a fact by no means easily ascertained, because confluent smallpox, which alone is ordinarily fatal, obliterates the vaccination marks in the worst cases, and the death is then usually recorded among the unvaccinated or the doubtful. For this reason alone, the official record, vaccinated or unvaccinated, is altogether untrustworthy and cannot be made the subject of accurate statistical inquiry. But there are other reasons why the comparison of the deaths of these two classes is worthless. Deaths registered as unvaccinated include 1. Infants dying under vaccination age and who, therefore, have no corresponding class among the vaccinated, but among whom the smallpox mortality is greatest. 2. Children too weakly or diseased to be vaccinated, and whose low vitality renders any severe disease fatal. 3. A large but unknown number of the criminal and nomad population who escape the vaccination officers. These are often badly fed and live under the most unsanitary conditions. They are therefore especially liable to suffer in epidemics of smallpox or other zymotic diseases. It is by the indiscriminate union of these three classes, together with those erroneously classed as unvaccinated, owing to the obliteration of marks or other defects of evidence, that the number of deaths registered unvaccinated is swollen far beyond its true proportions, and the comparison with those registered vaccinated rendered altogether untrustworthy and misleading. This is not a mere inference, for there is much direct evidence that the records unvaccinated and no statement in the reports of the Registrar General are often erroneous. As the chief argument for vaccination rests upon this class of facts, a few examples of the evidence referred to must be here given. 1. Mr. A. Feltrip of Ipswich gives a case of a boy aged 9 who died of smallpox and was recorded in the certificate as unvaccinated. By a search in the register of successful vaccinations, it was found that the boy, Thomas Taylor, had been successfully vaccinated on the 20th of May, 1868, by W. Adams, Suffolk Chronicle, May 5th, 1877. Number 2. In Notes on the Smallpox Epidemic of Birkhead, 1877, by Franz Vascher, M.D., we find the following. As regards the patients admitted to the fever hospital or treated at home, those entered as vaccinated displayed undoubted cicatrices as attested by competent medical witnesses, and those entered as not vaccinated were admitted unvaccinated or without the faintest mark. The mere assertions of patients or their friends that they were vaccinated counted for nothing, as about 80% of the patients entered in the third column of the table, unknown, were reported as having been vaccinated in infancy. Number 3. Bearing upon this important admission, we have the following statement in Dr. Russell's Glasgow Report, 1871-72, page 25. Sometimes persons were said to be vaccinated, but no marks could be seen. very frequently because of the abundance of the eruption. In some cases of those which are recovered, an inspection before dismissal discovered vaccine marks, sometimes very good. Number 4. The last epidemic of smallpox which visited vaccinated Preston was in 1877. In February of that year, Dr. Rigby, the medical officer of the Union, sent out a report in which he stated that out of 83 persons admitted into the Fulwood Smallpox Hospital, 73 were vaccinated. All recovered, he alleged, but the 10 unvaccinated cases all died. Here was a bold and specific statement. But what were the facts revealed after careful investigation by 2 committees? The first case reported as unvaccinated turned out to be a revaccinated policeman named Walter Egan. Another case reported as unvaccinated was a child named Mary Shorrock, vaccinated by the very medical officer who returned her as unvaccinated. In all, 6 cases out of 10 were proved to have been vaccinated, while 3 were doubtful, we not being able to trace them. From letter of Mr. J. Swindlehurst in the Walsall Observer, July 21st, 1888. Number 5. In 1872, Mr. John Pickering of Leeds carefully investigated a number of cases entered as not vaccinated by the medical officers of the Leeds Smallpox Hospital, tracing out the parents, examining the patients if alive, or obtaining the certificate of vaccination if they were dead. The result was that 6 patients entered as not vaccinated and still living were found to have good vaccination marks, while 9 others who had died and whose deaths had been registered as not vaccinated were proved to have been successfully vaccinated. In addition to these, 8 cases were proved to have been vaccinated, some of them 3 or 4 times, but unsuccessfully, and 4 others were certified unfit to be vaccinated, yet all were alike entered as unvaccinated. The full particulars of this investigation are to be found in a pamphlet by Mr. Pickering, published by F. Pitman, 20 Paternoster Row, London. Number 6. As further corroborative evidence of the untrustworthiness of all records on the subject emanating from medical men, the following quotation from an article on certificates of death in the Birmingham Medical Review for January 1874 is important. The italics are my own. In certificates given by us voluntarily, and to which the public have access, it is scarcely to be expected that a medical man will give opinions which may tell against or reflect upon himself in any way. In such cases he will most likely tell the truth, but not the whole truth, and assign some prominent symptoms of the disease as the cause of death. As instances of cases which may tell against the medical man himself, I will mention erysipelas from vaccination and puerperal fever. A death from the first cause occurred not long ago in my practice, and although I had not vaccinated the child, yet in my desire to preserve vaccination from reproach, I omitted all mention of it from my certificate of death. The illustrative facts now given cannot be supposed to be exceptional, especially when we consider the great amount of time and labour required to bring them to light, and taken in connection with the astounding admission of medical men, of which examples have been just given, they prove that no dependence can be placed on the official records of the proportions of vaccinated and unvaccinated among smallpox patients. While if Mr. Vacher's method of registration is usually followed, about 80% of those classified by the Registrar General under the heading "No Statement" have been really stated, by their parents or friends to have been vaccinated. Our hospital statistics necessarily give false results. But a still more serious matter remains to be considered, and it is a striking proof of the crude and imperfect evidence on which the important question of the value of vaccination has been decided, that the point in question has been entirely overlooked by every English advocate of vaccination, although it involves an elementary principle of statistical science. This point is that unless the records in our hospitals, vaccinated and unvaccinated, are strictly correct and properly classified, it can be demonstrated that true results cannot be deduced from them. The requisite comparison has, however, been made on a population of about 60,000, consisting of the officials and workmen employed on the Imperial Austrian State Railways by the head physician Dr. Leander Joseph Keller, and his results during the years 1872 to 73 are so important that it is necessary to give a brief abstract to them. Number 1. It is shown that the death rate of smallpox patients is greatest in the first year of life, then diminishes gradually to between the 15th and 20th year, and then rises again to old age, thus following exactly the same law as the general mortality. Number 2. The smallpox death rate among over 2,000 cases was 17.85%, of the cases closely agreeing with the general average. That of the unvaccinated was 23.2%, while that of the vaccinated was only 15.61%. Number 3. This result, apparently so favourable to vaccination, is shown to be wholly due to the excess of the unvaccinated in the first 2 years of life, and to be a purely numerical fact entirely unconnected with vaccination. This is proved as follows. Taking first all the ages above 2 years, the death rates of the vaccinated is 13.76, and of the unvaccinated is 13.15, almost exactly the same, but with a slight advantage to the unvaccinated. Taking now the first 2 years, the death rate is found to be as follows. First year of life, vaccinated 60.46, unvaccinated 45.24. Second year of life, vaccinated 54.05, unvaccinated 38.10. Thus the smallpox death rate is actually less for the unvaccinated than for the vaccinated in infants, and equal for all the higher ages. Yet the average of the whole is higher for the unvaccinated, simply on account of the greater proportion of the unvaccinated at those ages at which the mortality is universally greatest. It is thus made clear that any comparison of the smallpox mortality of the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, except at strictly corresponding ages, leads to entirely false conclusions. This curious and important fact may perhaps be rendered more easily intelligible by an illustration. Let us take the whole population up to 20 years of age and divide it into 2 groups, those who go to school and those who do not. If the smallpox mortality of these were separately registered, it would be found to be very much greater among the non-school goers, composed chiefly of infants, and of children too weakly to be sent to school, among whom the mortality is always very great, so much so that a doctor of wide experience, Dr. Vernon of Southport, has stated that he had never known an infant under 1 year of age recover from smallpox. But we should surely think a person either silly or mad who argued from such statistics that school-going was a protection against the disease, and that school children formed a protective population. Yet this is exactly comparable with the reasoning of those who adduce the greater mortality among unvaccinated smallpox patients of all ages and conditions as the very strongest argument in favour of vaccinations. Good statistics and good arguments cannot be upset or even weakened by those which are bad. I have shown that the main argument relied on by our adversaries rests on thoroughly unsound statistics, inaccurate to begin with and wrongly interpreted afterwards. Those which I have used, on the other hand, if not absolutely perfect, are yet the best and most trustworthy that exist. I ask statisticians and men of unbiased judgment to decide between them. Conclusion from the evidence. The result of this brief inquiry may be thus summarized. Number 1. Vaccination does not diminish smallpox mortality, as shown by the 45 years of the Registrar General Statistics and by the deaths of smallpox of our revaccinated soldiers and sailors being as numerous as those of the male population of the same ages of several of the large towns, although the former are picked, healthy men, while the latter include many thousands living under the most unsanitary conditions. Number 2. While thus utterly powerless for good, vaccination is a certain cause of disease and death in many cases, and is the probable cause of about 10,000 deaths annually by 5 inoculable diseases of the most terrible and disgusting character, which have increased to this extent steadily year by year since vaccination has been enforced by penal laws. Number 3. The hospital statistics showing a greater mortality of the unvaccinated than of the vaccinated have been proved to be untrustworthy, while the conclusions drawn from them are shown to be necessarily false. If these facts are true, or anything near the truth, the enforcement of vaccination by fine and imprisonment of unwilling parents is a cruel and criminal despotism which it behoves all true friends of humanity to denounce and oppose at every opportunity. Such legislation, involving as it does our health, our liberty, and our very lives, is too serious a matter to be allowed to depend on the misstatements of interested officials or the dogmas of a professional clique. Some of the misstatements and some of the ignorance on which you have relied have been here exposed. The statistical evidence on which alone a true judgment can be founded is as open to you as to any doctor in the land. We therefore demand that you, our representatives, shall fulfill your solemn duty to us in this matter by devoting to it some personal investigation and painstaking research, and if you find that the main facts as here stated are substantially correct, we call upon you to undo without delay the evil you have done. We therefore solemnly urge upon you the immediate repeal of the iniquitous penal laws by which you have forced upon us a dangerous and useless operation, an operation which has admittedly caused many deaths, which is probably the cause of greater mortality than smallpox itself, but which cannot be proved to have ever saved a single human life. Appendix. In addition to other difficulties besetting the students of our hospital records, one stands prominently forward as exceeding the others. Dr. Wallace has referred to the difficulty of comparing vaccinated with those called unvaccinated, who are a mixed class, often not even classed in age together, but a greater omission must be complained of. The only correct way of classing smallpox patients is by age and by eruption. The eruption or the state of the skin is the only scientific guide to the nature of the disorder. One kind of smallpox is so mild that even bad nursing can hardly kill the patient. Another kind so fatal that not the best nursing and the greatest skill can cure it. As a rule, these two kinds are lumped together without any distinction, and even when given, they are not often divided into vaccinated and unvaccinated. In general summaries, this classification is universally disregarded. The metropolitan hospitals have been in operation since 1869. During the 16 years reported upon to the managers, since that time they have received 53,579 cases of smallpox for treatment. Of this great total, no fewer than 41,061 are classed as vaccinated, 5,866 unvaccinated, and the remainder as doubtful. The fatality of the unvaccinated and doubtful is very heavy, but this is largely due to considerations as to the people who are the unvaccinated, which have already been urged and which are greatly strengthened by facts now to be adduced. The Handbook 1887, giving these particulars, has no doubtful class until 1880. Before that period, the unvaccinated absorbed them all. As to this doubtful class, why are there any doubts in this classification? The answer is that the vaccination marks are on the skin, and the skin is the part of the patient most affected in the very bad cases. In the mild cases, the skin does not suffer much. The vaccination marks are clearly visible, and so the good marks of the vaccination will most certainly be most numerous in the mild cases. But in the confluent cases, the skin is badly affected. The pustules run together, and if this eruption is over the vaccinated arm, no vaccination mark can be seen. But no case is recorded as vaccinated unless a mark is seen. So it comes to pass that such a patient declaring himself vaccinated is put down as doubtful, or as said to be vaccinated. We see now why this class is full of heavy fatality. It receives the doubtful bad classes, but never any doubtful mild ones. This is further confirmed by a reference to the most fatal cases of all, the malignant. In these, the skin is not degraded as it is in the confluent, the eruption is suppressed, and the blood poisoned. But the vaccination marks show. From several reports of medical superintendents, I have collected 661 of these very fatal cases. In only 8 cases were there doubts, the rest yield. Vaccinated 486 persons with 432 deaths, and unvaccinated 167 persons with 150 deaths. Nothing more damaging to vaccination could be recorded. Yet in a purely age table, or in a table of vaccinated and unvaccinated, without reference to the state of the skin, all this is buried. We see then that in mild cases, error as to classification is very unlikely ever to occur. In these, no deaths need be feared, except from complications.